I think like a lot of creative people who spent a lot of time, my whole life growing up, sort of honing a lot of these skills. And I started to have some of those first sort of aha moments of what was truly becoming possible with AI. There's almost a psychic kind of gut punch as a creative person, where if you're not resilient, that gut punch could be really discouraging, right? Sort of like why even bother factor, right? Say you're a person who makes images, you make illustrations, or you're a photographer, or you could be a musician, and hear some of the things that AI can create now in terms of music. From that, this is going to be really impressive to, wow, this is kind of scary how good this is. I think it can be both a motivator, but also it can, on the other side, it can be something that can be discouraging to a certain degree. So it was important for me to be able to take that moment and jump that hurdle and say, okay, great. Some of the things that used to make me special as a creative person, being able to do and make some things that could only really be done by people like myself who had developed these particular skills. Now, those things aren't as maybe as special as they were before in some regard, because of the sort of democratization of the tools, and that to make a really amazing looking photograph or amazing looking illustration or something like that isn't something that's for the few to be able to create. So I think that's a really big part of it. I think a lot of creative people are struggling with that.
Today we have a special guest. Unfortunately, it's just me today. My co-host and brother had some technical issues, so he's not going to join us in this session today. But it's all fine. I'm here. I'm here with a special guest. His name is Camm Rowland. Cam, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me.
Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Yeah. Hey, I'm Cam. I am the Chief Creative and AI Officer for Kepler Group. We're based out of New York City. We are a full funnel, full service marketing agency. We've got about 650 people located in 10 offices around the world. We are part of the Q Collective, which is a group of companies, including IDEO, Sidley, SY Partners, and some great other companies that we collaborate with really closely. So I'm super excited to chat with you today.
Awesome. Sounds great. Okay, let's start it out. So as I could research a little bit about you, you've navigated creative leadership across production agencies and brand sides before Kepler, right? So how was each of these experiences and how it shaped the way you view AI's role in the creative work today?
Yeah, I think broadly speaking, and looking back at all the different experiences I've had, and of course most of those existed, and I was part of those experiences before AI, right? So when I was working in production, working initially on the agency side, and even when I started working on the brand side before joining Kepler, AI wasn't really a part of the equation when it comes to creative. And when I look back at it now, and think about all the capabilities and opportunities there are with AI, it really could go back and say, wow, there's just so many incredible things that would change, things that we can make better, things that are both scary and exciting. And I think about AI generally as, and you hear this a lot, right? An enhancement, it's a tool. But what I think is really important about AI as a tool is that it really gives us the opportunity to focus our energy on the things that are sort of most human and special to us, right? So I look at AI, whether it's, if you think back, if I think back to my, sort of production days, the amount of time that was spent visualizing a concept versus developing a concept, right? And so much of what's so special about the creative part of visual storytelling, and back in my early days at Digital Kitchen, was developing a really cool idea, really interesting story. And I love the hands-on aspect of sort of visualizing that story, but the time involved in both sort of parts was really disproportionate in favor of the sort of visualization, right? So if you had maybe a week to your pitch, you spent maybe a day really developing the story you wanted to tell, because it took several days, right, to start visualizing that. So when I think about going back in time and being able to use some of the tools that we have at our disposal right now, I can imagine being able to spend a lot more time thinking about the idea and the story I want to tell versus having to jump so quickly into how to visualize that story. So I think that's that sort of idea of being able to focus more energy on some of the sort of conceptual sides of things, the strategic sides of things. I think is then true across all of the sort of other domains that I've worked. Certainly, when on the agency side, thinking about AI as an enhancement in terms of um, a a creative sort of colleague partner to bounce ideas off of, to not replace the great ideas that human beings come up with that are weird and exciting, but as a way to sort of speed that process up, pressure test things, challenge things. So again, I think it's really all about unlocking more of our brain space to be able to think creatively, and then sort of minimizing the amount of time we need to spend on some of the more tedious tasks, even if we really love them. Right, I'm a hands-on creative person. I love the craft of putting things together visually, and so while that's still something that I'm really passionate about, I think that a lot of these new tools and things sort of speed that process along.
Can you walk us a little bit through the visualization production visualization concept before and after AI, and what do you see is the big change and how
Yeah,
that speeds up the process?
sure. I mean, oh my gosh, when I think of starting out in my career, a lot of what I did was storyboarding, right? That was a huge part of sort of the motion design and animation and sort of film world. And certainly it still is. Obviously, it's evolved quite a lot. But if I think about the amount of time I would spend creating a single picture, like a single shot, a single frame of a spot that I wanted to design. Um, Going out and if you think about right now, you could be working with Dali, you could be working with Midjourney, or you could be working with all sorts of different tools, Gemini, and essentially describe the scene that you want and get and hone it and refine it and really visualize that thing really really rapidly. Where truly, when I started out, it was find a picture of this, cut out that little piece, stitch that together with this other piece, and it was sort of very collagey, right? And Photoshop artistry, the technical ability to do ultra heavy duty compositing, finessing all these little weird ingredients that you're finding, little snippets and bits and pieces of images to be able to sort of weave together a single picture. The amount of time it took to just make one convincing image, right, that was part of a sequence in telling a story, um, took an enormous amount of experience to be able to do well, just technical experience to be able to do that well in the tools we had, but then time and nuance and just so much effort. So I think that's where it started with. I've got a little bit of time to develop this idea, but I know how intense the actual storyboarding or visualization process is going to be. So you have to reserve a ton of time for that. And it evolved even in the time that I was working really heavily in production, evolved heavily from simply storyboards being sort of enough to a point where, creative companies were pitching really significantly developed visual pre-visualizations, right? So you're talking about doing animatics, boardmatics, really sophisticated stuff, and all the companies are sort of upping their game, right? So it was even more time put into those visualizations. And if you think about, if you were to have those tools right now, you could spend maybe three-quarters of your time developing what that story was going to be, and then sort of in the last chapter be like, okay, now we're going to make it real. And if you've got those workflows and you've got those tools really honed, um, you can make really quick work of that. Like if I'm sure that as an AI person, you're probably flooded with all these examples of content that people are making now, right? It's like, look at this short film I made in 25 minutes. I made this thing on my phone in a half hour, right? It's sort of insane. And I think that shows, with some of these new tools, that it's not about deprioritizing the importance of that craft of making things, but when all you're trying to do is demonstrate a story to get an idea across, I think I think that's a major shift, probably. I don't work as heavily in just pure production anymore, where I'm at Kepler, but I can imagine that space and the people working in that space are visualizing things very quickly.
Yeah, I was really surprised when I saw, I think it was on Twitter or X, in maybe a couple of months ago, there was this, seriously, you couldn't tell it was AI. It was like this similar, it was an anime that somebody created with
Hmm.
their son, and then they did it together, and then I think they were just pitching each other what will be the story be. And seriously, it looks like a Studio Ghibli
Yeah,
animation.
sure.
It's really well done. Of course, if you zoom in, then there's like some
Hmm.
AI artifacts there, but
Sure. Yeah.
it was I was blown away. I think it's getting to a point that it's getting really hard to tell if it's
Absolutely. I
actually
mean,
hand
if
animated or not.
the live action quality, and the film, the way that it's mimicking the quality of film is spectacular, and everybody kind of always uses the classic, now classic, Will Smith spaghetti scenario, right? With like, oh my gosh, a year or so ago, people saying, oh, there's no way, AI is just not capable of reproducing sort of live action footage and those sort of things, and the sort of six finger type of issue. But we've seen it jump so far since then. I tend to think, and just kind of generally operate in a mindset that all of those limitations are going to be gone. If they're not gone yet, they're going to be gone soon. And sort of thinking about the AI, from a capability standpoint of being somewhat limitless. Yeah, again, those are exciting and scary things, right? Like, I said, I practice these sort of crafts hands on my whole career, and so I'm looking to find the excitement in creating things in other ways. And yeah, the jump has been faster than I think anybody could have possibly imagined. So we're all trying to figure out how to pivot and find ways to both extend the work we're doing in new ways, take our existing skills and how we can sort of bolster those skills. Um, so yeah, it's moving really fast. It's pretty wild.
What do you think about just trying to talk a little bit about the creative process, right? Because I think there's a lot of debate if AI is gonna be able to reproduce human creativity, let's say. So what is your take as like let's say as a creative first? How do you think is your relationship with with your own creative process and how it's evolving with AI embedded into this into a new workflow?
Yeah. Um, I mean, that's like really personal. It's a really personal question, and it's just sort of spiritual struggle that goes on there, right? So, I think that uh, there's two things. There's sort of the spiritual side and the sort of tactical side, and on the spiritual side, I think, like a lot of creative people who spent a lot of time, right, my whole life growing up, sort of honing a lot of these skills, and when I started to have some of those first sort of aha moments of what was truly becoming possible with AI, there's almost a psychic kind of gut punch as a creative person, where if you're not resilient, that gut punch could be really discouraging, right? Sort of like a why even bother factor, right? Say you're a person who makes images, you make illustrations, or you're a photographer, or you're all sorts of different kinds of. You could be a musician, and here are some of the things that AI can create now in terms of music. And when it went from that, this is going to be really impressive, to wow, this is kind of scary how good this is. I think it can be both a motivator, but also it can, on the other side, it can be something that can be discouraging to a certain degree. And I think it's important that well, it was important for me to be able to take that moment and jump that hurdle and say, okay, great. Some of the things that used to make me special as a creative person, being able to do and make some things that could only really be done by people like myself who had developed these particular skills, are now those things aren't as maybe as special as they were before in some regard, because of the sort of democratization of the tools, and that to make a really amazing looking photograph or amazing looking illustration or something like that isn't something that's um, now for the few to be able to create. So I think that's a really big part of it. Like I think a lot of creative people are struggling with that and trying to find the spot to be, really positive. Tactically, though, as I started to really embrace and explore everything, it's as integrated into my work as like the internet or electricity, right? It becomes so second nature that when I first started using AI, it was something where I was like, oh, I could use AI for that, right? It was like I'm going about my business. I'm thinking, you know what? I bet AI could help with that. And the very first times that I started to use it, it was almost something that you'd have to remember to try. Really, really rapidly, however, it becomes, second nature in the sense of you're using it just in the same way that you would think about utilizing any other kind of digital technology. So it's really, woven in. I think one of the really interesting things about that becoming second nature is that it's so much more powerful than previous digital technology because we can actually make the tools that we want. So this is like a really big unlock, different than from, when you're working with other internet-based technology, where like I can achieve this thing I want on the web. Now, as you really as you get deeper into AI, you recognize that you can actually make the things that help you make the things you want, right? I almost think it's a little bit like, I don't know if you've ever seen the Lego movies, but there's characters in the
Yeah.
Lego movies that can essentially just build what they need whenever they want it. And to a certain degree, that's kind of where we are as creatives. If you're really taking advantage of the technology, if you need a thing to help you do a thing, you can basically, make it, whether that's something that you make in code, as something that you make with an automation, something that you just make with a really interesting system of prompts or context. So I think that's a really, kind of wild moment where it's almost harder to think of things you can't do than think of the things that you can do. It's really, there's just so much potential there. Um,
Yeah, I
yeah.
agree. It opens up a new world of possibilities, even though that it's a bit scary. You know sometimes because it's evolving so fast that it's really hard to keep up. What will be the tools that you've been using on a regular basis?
Well, I think certainly LLMs, like really across the board, and utilizing those for their unique benefits, across them. I'm in this, well, fortunately and unfortunately, I'm in this spot where I'm subscribing to kind of all of the LLMs, right? Which is it makes the for a monthly bill, but each of them is, kind of developing new capabilities that sort of outpace the others, and there's sort of like a leapfrogging that goes on where you'll use one because it's the best at coding for a particular period of time, and it's sort of like the benchmarks get sort of outdone by another LLM. So, obviously the LLMs are really important. I particularly lean on GPT-o3 really, really heavily as a almost like a colleague, like a partner. Um, and I think that reasoning model is sort of the strongest and my favorite right now. I know that GPT-o3 Pro was just released that kind of takes that to another sort of deeper level. It's slower, but in terms of reasoning, it can handle some more complex things. So
Can you
that's
give you can you give us an example of how you use O3 if you can disclose that?
yeah. I mean, oh gosh, what don't I use O3 for? One of the things that I actually use, so I use it for a lot of different things. I mean, like I said, it's actually a really hard question because, like I said, I use all these tools sort of second nature. So it's sort of like asking, how do you use the internet, right? To me, because that's how integrated it is in processes. Um, I essentially, uh, I compartmentalize a lot of different things into GPT. One of the reasons that I like ChatGPT specifically, is projects, and how it sort of separates projects. So I use those really heavily where I have sort of subject matter, sort of domains separated, so I can sort of toggle between utilizing it to help me develop technology ideas, right? And then solve problems for brands, and then think about pitches and think about all sorts of different things. So I sort of think about it as like different sort of sections of the brain, and each one of those different projects is sort of laden with really specific context, right? So I've trained each section, each project to sort of understand and know the different things I need to do. Now, we actually use Gemini heavily at Kepler. And so I'm using that too. It's again across all of them, and we have very specific terms about which tools that we can use for different kinds of things, of course. And we're an extremely high security sort of environment and things like that. So you have to really know like how you can use your tools. If any listeners are working at particular companies and they're thinking I should use all the different LLMs for everything, there's not advice to do that, because there's probably rules at your company. But yeah, I think that's kind of how I use it, is almost allowing me to sort of switch between different things and having environments that are sort of pre-set up to help me think about different topics. I don't use it a lot for code. I tend to use Claude more for code. I think Claude's sort of achieving the highest benchmarks. And then if I'm really doing something fairly involved, I'll use a tool like Replit or Lovable or something like that to be able to help build code. And then a lot of one of the little tricks that I use is T is really effective at developing prompts. So that whole time period of where prompt engineering was this thing that you had to get really good at to be able to achieve results. That sort of skill set, people are focusing a little bit more on context engineering now than they are on prompt engineering, partly because these LLMs became so great at developing prompts that like, oh my, you may recall this if you were using early sort of generative AI, where you had to really like use just the right language, or structure your prompts just right to be able to get a good picture out of a generative platform. And that need to know how to construct those prompts is largely been replaced by the AIs doing themselves. So one of the tricks that I'll do is actually have ChatGPT develop the prompts that I put into other platforms. Seems fairly obvious. At the time when I started doing that, it was actually sort of hidden. You could ask ChatGPT for something and it would give you a picture, and it would sort of hide the prompt. You could double click in and find the prompt that it used. But that was one of the things I started playing with really early on, was give it a medium quality prompt and have it give me a picture, and then double click in and see what did you say to describe that picture, and you'd get this really, really rich description. And then I could kind of use that and modify that in other places.
Yeah, I mean this. You can basically ask ChatGPT or any of these LLMs to generate any prompt for you, and then you will probably know what is the specifics that Lovable or Cursor would need, right? So it just puts in the
Mm-hmm.
right format for you. What I found out really for it was is working really well for me is basically I'm using Mid Journey together with the new ChatGPT image generation. So I ask ChatGPT to describe an image, then I get some of the descriptions there. Then I just throw it in Bin Journey, which also has a Descript tool that to describe images. But then, usually it's better at describing scenes and stuff. Then Midjourney generates something, and then if I want to place or to generate in a specific style, then I put it back on ChatGPT and ask it to give some photo references, put it into this style, and then it usually does it really well. So I just found like this framework to be working really well for me. It's just insane. But it's
Yeah,
you ended
it
up
really is.
you kind of end up having to use more than one depending on what you're doing, because they kind of complement each other, or
Mm-hmm.
they cover some of their weakest spots, right?
Absolutely. It's a good reason to have on right over here. I've got a pretty wide monitor, and that comes in handy because when you're really deep into these workflows, you might have 4 or 5 different tools up that you're passing things between, just like you described. Yeah, and that's the benefit of just really getting your hands into all these things and exploring them. You discover those little workarounds and those little tricks to get great results.
Yeah, it's experimentation. It's a lot of how to figure it out, how to use these tools. So For example, for Midjourney, if you have like photography background or some photography terms, your prompts will be way better because you can tell the lenses that you want the picture to be
Hmm.
generated, and because it was trained with all that lingo, it generates like really really accurate, depictions of the images that you want. So you know,
Yeah,
a lot
that
of
was
your
part.
skills will be translated into using this tech as well, right?
Absolutely. That was I you probably remember this in that first sort of stage of prompt design. People are discovering these little sort of hacks, right? Where you'd say, well, when I describe, the photography I want in terms of the f-stop or the film speed, or I name a camera, I name a Hasselblad camera, right? It's starting to create these associations. It's like, oh, the user said Hasselblad, so it's now referencing a category, a whole new sort of echelon of photography versus if you said something like Instagram, it's referencing a different sort of tier of photography. So you started seeing, people say, "Give me a cat wearing a birthday hat," but you reference these high end lenses and things like that to get like a completely different level of polish on the end.
Yeah, it's
And people kind of just spammed it. There was so much of just like name, just the sort of word, just garbage words that were being thrown out. Long strings of descriptive words that were just like, if I say every good word in the dictionary, it'll make something good. And to a certain degree, some of that stuff actually worked. It was a really kind of weird time where people were trying to figure out how to engineer prompts.
I got really really sloppy in my prompts, like because I know these elements are so powerful that if you just write very
Mm,
lazily with
hmm.
some
Oh
misspelling
yeah,
or typos, it's just gonna understand.
it still gets it. Yeah.
Yes. So it's just like, what's gonna happen with my writing skills in a couple
Well,
of
that's
years?
real. That's real. I mean, that's a whole other podcast probably. What's going on with our mental capabilities, right? As we start to have some of these things. I think about like when, cell phones first started being used. I forgot all the phone numbers because I just didn't need to do that anymore. And what
Exactly.
what are the trade-offs here as we start to utilize these things to help us think? Hopefully we're displacing that and we're saying, okay, well, we're having this thing help us do this, but maybe that opens up new sort of brain cells to be thinking about other things. I don't know, but hopefully it's not making us dumber.
Yeah, I hope so too. Um, so just to talk a little bit more on practical cases and maybe insights, do
Hmm.
you um, could you share like a campaign or a creative initiative where AI played a central role? Maybe from ideation to execution.
Yeah, I think we at Kepler we are working a lot on what I would call narrow AI tools, but sort of customized narrow AI tools. So like a narrow AI tool being like something that does a particular single thing, right? You could think of that as like maybe it's a spam filter. I'm not saying these are the things that we make, but just a spam filter or something that upreses a photo or anything like that, right? And what I've been really excited about is making more what you could call sort of solutions architecture, solving relatively complex problems versus just kind of focusing in on individual things. Uh, I can't speak to some of the sort of more solutions architecture kinds of projects because those can be really, really involved, actually really hard to describe and also kind of a little bit sensitive. But from what I would call this sort of narrow, sort of customized AI, a good example would be a project that we did for a one of our apparel brand clients where more or less it's everything we do with AI is there's human in the loop. So there's nothing, we're not really creating anything that's like, put an asset in and get like a finished asset out that kind of goes out into the world. We're everything kind of involves our human and creative intervention. But in this particular instance, the product is essentially designed to look at a product detail page. So like an apparel product detail page featuring, probably stills of a model and things like that wearing clothes and some features and things listed on the side, whether that's a ASIN on Amazon or that's a product detail page on a brand's website. And essentially taking all of that and also ingesting a customer persona that we create on our end, right? So like who are we making this content for, and what is appealing to them? Looking at the content that exists on that page. Again, usually stills. Maybe there's some video assets, but it's usually a fairly light amount of sort of quality assets to work with, and then the information there, and then also ingesting if it's available. Sometimes we ingest brand guidelines around sort of brand voice. If not, we generate brand voice guidelines to, that assimilate, brand voice based on a lot of different kind of documentation. And then that basically is a semi-automated process that produces videos at scale, right? So you would go from a product detail page with some images on a carousel to something with fully scripted, fully animated in the style of the brand, something that you could see airing on TV, right? And essentially doing that and setting up almost a template for each individual brand, and then being able to iterate off of that. So if you do it for, let's say you did it for a jacket, once you've established that, then you could do it for a pair of shoes and all sorts of other things, and kind of iterate on that. That's what again, that's sort of that narrow customized AI that is really specifically honed in for that particular brand, enabling them to create high quality content across lots and lots of products where, historically being able to create a high-end video for a product that maybe isn't one of your, sort of top products that's receiving the most investment in terms of marketing materials, it sort of enables that. And I think that is a space, though, even as I describe it, is becoming more and more heavily sort of commoditized, right? Like that's not something where like, oh, wow, you made a really cool video out of something as simple as a product detail page. I think a year ago, that's something that people said, how is that even really possible? And now that stuff is becoming more sort of commonplace. And that's where, for me, and as I think about the creative organization at Kepler, but also just Kepler at large, is how do you identify sort of other problems that are more complex to solve to the degree that they cannot be easily commoditized, right? Like you can't, they're not things that can be solved off of the shelf. And so that to me is the most interesting thing, rather than trying to sort of be in the technical sort of rat race for who can make little incremental pieces of who can resize an ad, who can, take this voice and map it to this image, and those kinds of things are less interesting to me than looking at more complicated and complex problems, and creating sort of more bespoke solutions for companies that can't find solutions for the things they need off the shelf.
And for agencies and creatives listening, like maybe smaller shops or big tech stacks, that what would be a practical step they can take to begin integrating AI into their creative process? Or
If for folks that are listening, if they're working in the creative world, I'm assuming, did you say creative shops or just any kind of shop in general?
any kind no, creative boutiques or like
Yeah.
agencies, yes.
If you're working in the creative field and you have not yet dipped a toe into AI, I would suggest with the highest degree of urgency that you start thinking about it and exploring it. The very very first thing, if somebody was truly like, if they're uninitiated AI, I would say immediately get your hands on an LLM like ChatGPT. It's interesting. I've heard people say, anecdotally, just $20 is a lot for a subscription to technology, right? That makes it really obvious really quickly that those folks who say that are not yet recognizing the sort of transformative potential of it. Like once you actually are starting to use these tools, you realize $20 is such a tiny expense for the value that they're bringing. So I'd say right away, getting involved in that. If you can get a team account or something like that that gives you access to the best models, I would say go for that. But first and foremost, use an LLM. Um, Second, I think a second tier of engagement, once you've kind of got into that, and you're like, okay, yeah, we think we're really jamming on using an LLM or multiple LLMs as part of your process. I would look at vibe coding tools. Vibe coding is like actually a pretty new term, I think coined in the last handful of months as some of these new platforms have evolved and emerged. But this is tools like Bolt, Lovable, Replit. I use Replit as tool for me. I picked Replit actually specifically because I'm not a highly technical developer or anything by trade, so it's really allowing you to use natural language and English to develop sort of web apps and things like that. So it's an extremely low barrier, right? I think one of the things that kind of holds people back is that it's sort of intimidating. They're like, oh, I feel like maybe I'm a little bit behind. Some of this stuff seems complicated. And really the only way to jump that hurdle is to get hands on. And trust me when I say when we talk about LLMs and even things like these vibe coding platforms, the barrier is extremely low. You just got to get your hands in there, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, I can do these kinds of things. I can make these things really fast, and it feels like you have almost a new superpower. I think if you're to that tier and you're thinking, how can I explore the next level, would probably be looking at tools like Zapier, N8N, Make, depending on kind of just your speed and your technical sort of savvy. Something like these are a bit more complicated. The learning curve is a little bit higher than something like a Replit, and certainly higher than something like having a chat with ChatGPT. But that is truly sort of a next level unlock in terms of what you can achieve. And those tools are really helping you make agents, helping you create sort of custom automations and things. So people hear a lot about agents and they sound maybe really intimidating or complex. And really, really, really wild, agents can be somewhat complex, but you can also make agents really fast that can do simple things. And even though I think we're coming up into a time where you'll probably be able to create agents with natural language pretty soon, as in make an agent who does this thing, then does that thing, then sends me an email about that, then schedules that. I think we're getting to a point where we're probably going to be able to do those things with natural language in a not too distant future. But being able to actually go under the hood and create some of these agents, it really gives you an understanding of sort of the inner workings of them, which I think will make, even when it does evolve to the point of being doable to a certain degree with natural language, it'll be helpful to know. Last thing I'd say is like discovering, as you get kind of in the mix of all this and it starts to become that sort of second nature and you start using these tools sort of by default, you'll think of sort of, I don't want to call them life hacks, but things where you're like, oh, I can do this thing really, really well. You were describing some like, oh, if I take this and put it over there and I put it back over here, those sort of processes that work for you best will sort of start to emerge, and you'll come up with your own special tricks and things like that. One of the special tricks that I use, which has been hugely empowering to me and been able to make me work sort of better, faster, is the way I use prompts is I essentially create sort of quick keys and like text shortcuts for really, really long prompts, and then I sequence them a lot of times. So I'm almost like if you had and if you wanted to create almost a chain automation using AI, and say it was doing something really complex that had to do with scheduling, right? You could be like schedule one, schedule two, schedule three. And each time you type one of those little codes, it could be a massive for your AI, right? Which would be a really, really time consuming process. But when you can boil that long sort of chain of commands down into really short text prompts, right? Using a text shortener like a shortcut app, it all of a sudden means that you're executing these like really big and complex systems of prompts really, really fast. And that can be a great way to sort of prototype new workflows. It's not a substitute for eventually, building actual tech apps, right? But it's almost like being able to make sort of chain-based automation apps on the fly. So that's an example of a kind of thing where as you use, you're like, oh, I can do something so much faster if I use this. Like I use these text expansion apps, and That's completely not what they're intended to do. They're more intended to say like, oh, when I write BRB, I want you to say be right back. The way I use them is when I say, a short snippet like BRB, it gives you a, you know, 10,000 characters of context to do something.
Yeah, sometimes if you have a long prompt, that's prone to hallucination as well. Because I
Mm,
think they don't. There's a limit of how much they can handle at once. So a good rule of thumb, at least that I've found for myself, is just break that down, and you can
yeah.
ask AI to just break that down. So it's just okay. This is everything that I wanted to do. So now we're gonna take one step at a time, and you call the steps. So every time you finish a step, you bring the second one. It's just crazy because you
That's a, yeah.
yeah.
It's a really, really valuable learning. And I run into the same thing too. When you'll ask for something complex, a multi-step thing, or you'll ask it for, a complex answer, and it will just start making stuff up. It's just like, I don't know, man, this is really tough. I'm just gonna start hallucinating stuff in there. And you break that up, just like you said. I mean, that's a really good thing, I think, for people to take away. It's extremely practical advice that when you ask for, say, ten responses or five responses, and it starts getting a little bit it starts slacking off at number four, number five, and we'll start basically making things up. If you do break those into separate prompts, you're going to get so much better results. i think people don't I think people don't generally know that habit of AI to do that, so I'm really glad you brought that up. It's a great piece of advice.
I want to just shift a little bit to audience behavior, right? So more and more we're seeing AI take on curation role, and on how people discover products and choose products. How do you see this shift from people browsing to AI recommendations, right? How is that changing brands? There's a How is that changing also creative messaging
Yeah.
in your point of
um,
view?
I think I do you have you a question for you. Have you used AI in any kind of shopping context before?
Not really. I mean, I ask for suggestions, but I like to go and check reviews, and but
Hmm.
maybe I'm too old school. Maybe that's not going to be the norm in a couple of months.
Well, I think it's a good example. So you said, you're more hands-on and you want to go and check those reviews, right? And I am too. If I could be buying a small piece of technology and I'll read a lot of reviews before I do it. I think that's where this sort of AI first customer is going. So I do think in the very near future, what you're going to experience is like all those reviews. I can just have my AI assistant scrub all those reviews for me, because AI. So I like to think about sometimes, and sometimes when I talk about AI for shopping, I show a little visual of like a guy with like a little cute AI robot on his shoulder, because that's really it's this co-pilot that is extremely objective and rational and essentially unbiased, generally speaking, unbiased by sort of brand power. They're looking at really objective sort of hard proof points to help people make decisions. And folks are going to these AIs at radically increasing numbers, right? The percentage of people who are opting to ask Perplexity or ask ChatGPT or another assistant to help them navigate the myriad, product options, is radically growing. And one of the reasons is that it's a massive time saver. A lot of people like poking around online and like going through the listicles and all that. And some people just are like, look, I just want to know the top few that are really aligned, that have the best reviews, that have the best sort of third party sort of trusted recommendations, and get straight to that. So that whole sort of genre of consumer, I actually, you almost think about it as like this is the first time in history where the customer hasn't only been human, right? It's different than SEO. It's different than trying to show up on a search engine results page. It's actually trying to appeal to a shopper with a different mindset, which is again very sort of practical, and very objective. And so as people are doing that, um, they're jumping straight to it, and they're getting this sort of curated set of recommendations. And if you think about the customer historically and how brands have tried to reach customers in sort of the mid funnel, they're all paying into shooting signals at these people, and you're sort of like you're seeing ads and you're seeing all these different things as you're thinking about shopping. What the AI assistant is doing is essentially shielding you from all of that conversation and just letting a few of those signals in. So if you're jumping into shopping with an AI assistant, you're like, I need a dishwasher. Tell me the tell me the best that, I need a dishwasher that's like this, or I have these particular, preferences. It's basically saying, okay, these are the only three signals that you need to pay attention to, and here's how and why they're different. Effectively making like a lot of that other noise that's out there of brands trying to reach people um, uh, decreasingly effective as more people sort of adopt this mode of shopping, right? So they're not just online looking at ads and things like that.
But
And
it's
and what?
also, sorry,
No, go for it.
it also like by having an AI curated, there's basically no room for brand differentiation, right? So how do you actually build a brand when you're talking to AI bots? They are basically looking into the information, and what is the
Yeah,
implication of building brands
yeah.
when we face that reality, right?
I think that brand building uh, is arguably more important than it has been because the sort of middle of the funnel is being altered so much. So if you think about the value of building a brand, if the mid funnel and lower funnel are going to be heavily sort of owned by that sort of AI assistant curator, the brand building and storytelling you're telling at the top of the funnel is really, really important. Namely, because there's two reasons that I think it's still really, really important. One is if you just go into an objective conversation with your AI and say, "Look, I want a recommendation for a thing," and it says, "Okay, here are three options." If one of those brands is connected with you in any kind of meaningful way previously, you're going to most likely choose that option, right? It's going to be there in your mind, like, oh, you're sort of predisposed. That brand means something to you. So it could be the tiebreaker. There's also a potential where you actually you like a brand enough, it does a good enough job at telling a story that resonates with you, connects with you and your values, that your AI would know that, in the sense that you'd say, and I'm thinking a little bit ahead, but thinking about when, and people don't want to talk about wearables now, and things like that. There's a lot of like, barriers to people accessing these things, but or wanting them. But as you think about AI assistants becoming more and more sort of knowledgeable about you, they might know your favorite restaurants, they might know your favorite hotels to stay in, they might know your favorite brand of, shoes or makeup or whatever. So building that message and that sort of brand awareness could help you actually inform that person's AI, because they've said, hey, I really like this, I really like this hotel, or I saw this ad. When we start thinking about cars, I want to think about this brand. And that's the other thing, is when you begin that search, if you have built up a meaningful brand to people, they may say to their AI assistant, I want a dishwasher, and specifically make sure you include Whirlpool when you're thinking about it, because that brand, means something to me. So it's definitely not saying that brand building is less important. In fact, I think to a certain degree you could argue that it's more important. It's really just changing that sort of mid and lower funnel of, it may impact where people put dollars, it may impact where people spend some energy. I don't think it means that creatives are going to be making creative work specifically to necessarily appeal to AI. I think really it's almost a separate layer of messaging that exists for AIs when you think about sort of schema markup and things like that are really just there to talk to robots. So when you're building a website, it still may be the same beautiful pictures and videos and things like that, but the underlying code there that's exposed to an AI agent, right, is going to be basically written as specifically to be extremely informative to an AI agent, or an AI search, right? So it's a new layer, and I think when brands think about how do you appeal to AI in that consideration, it's really about planting way more seeds that the AI care about, right? So AI cares a lot about reviews. It cares a lot about sort of spec sheets and product comparisons. It cares a lot about validated, sort of trusted mentions if trusted websites are talking about your product. And so that might mean marketers shift some of their energy into some of that, specifically laying the groundwork and sort of seeding all of the information that AI care about more, knowing that a lot of people are going to be, working with their AI assistant to do that shopping, and maybe less about, less exposed to some of the other sort of direct to human marketing.
Hey everyone, we noticed that a lot of people watching on YouTube are not subscribers. So it would help us a lot if you will click on the subscribe button down below. And for those who are listening to this episode, because we're also a podcast and we're everywhere, please leave us a review. It helps a lot to share our content and to multiply the audience. And we really, really appreciate it. It doesn't cost anything. It's free. Please leave us a review. Thank you. I just want your opinion in regards to what do you think AI will never be able to replicate when it comes to human creativity?
Uh, yeah, that's a really cool topic, and like I said, a part of actually part of that sort of existential dilemma, right, that I was describing at the beginning, like some of this, like what does it all mean to sort of be creative with all these new things. I think um, taste is something that is going to be highly prized, um, and I don't mean taste in the sense of using sort of normal traditional measures of like, oh, well, this checks these boxes necessarily, and that constitutes, taste. I think taste is going to be a little bit more of a special magic that folks have to be able to identify. I mean, it's always been really important, and most of the great advertising you've ever seen exists because somebody with a kind of unique taste said, this is something, there's something to this. Um, so I think that's going to be really, really critical. And taste is something that's is really uniquely human. You can't rely on AI to have that. It's not a good curator. It doesn't have taste. I remember when I first started using or playing with AI generated audio and music specifically. I was like, I jumped on to see what Suno was all about really early as a music generation tool. And what I noticed was it was, first of all, I was sort of blown away by its ability to produce like pretty amazing quality stuff. Not necessarily stuff I'd listen to, I put on my playlist, but to go from essentially it's not capable of making music to the level that it was able to make was pretty incredible. But what I noticed right away was there's really no way for it to tell if what it made is trash or or really good. Like it doesn't know, and so even in that context, it was all about taste, being able to identify, what sounded good. It reminded me though of the need for taste reminded me of something I think I saw recently, maybe in a documentary, maybe I read, I don't remember, but it was about Bohemian Rhapsody, the Queen song, and how that was initially sort of rejected as being released as a single. You know, people, because of their using sort of traditional measures for what a great pop song is, looked at that and said, "Oh, it's too long. Radio stations are never going to play it. Listeners will never listen to a song that long, right? Or that has this construct. It's not a typical pop song." And so it's sort of rejected on in that way. And there was a DJ, I don't remember the guy's name, but basically sort of accidentally played it on the radio a handful of times, and it sort of blew up, right, as like one of the a massive, massive hit. And it's, a lot of people consider it sort of the greatest pop song ever made. And um, that's the difference between sort of taste and, like, when we think about people, a lot of people are concerned about, the quality of creative being, well, if everything's driven by algorithms and everything is about like checking all these different boxes and sort of optimization, what happens to creative quality? And if you're in that world, do you create a Bohemian Rhapsody, right? Is sort of that goes off of the map of what traditionally is considered sort of viable in its category. You might find that without taste and without people sort of pushing that and adding that human unpredictable, weird kind of quality into the things that they make, you would be in a world without Bohemian Rhapsody, which would is I don't want to live in that world, right? So I think that's going to be really important. So taste is one. Conviction, I think, is actually another one, and that actually dovetails. You could even take the Bohemian Rhapsody sort of story further, right? Conviction is like, no, this is there was the DJ who had conviction, right, and taste to say, no, I think this is important. The people need to hear this and sort of help do that. So I think that's standing behind an idea, right? AI can produce myriad ideas, or combinations, recombinations of existing ideas, and but it's not going to stand by anything or advocate for anything or say this is actually a really good thing. So conviction, I think, and then part of that same kind of in spirit is intuition, and I think intuition has to do with the difference between AI is great at recognizing patterns in pre-existing things and not really good at looking around corners and having a sort of gut instinct about something that may be happening in the future or something that could be emerging. So I think some of those elements are unlikely to be, or unlikely to be reproduced by AI. There's so many other elements though, the human, the relationship building, the trust building, just the softer skills that humans have. So I think that's going to be, really, really important for people to develop you know, um, being relatable, likable, trustworthy, are skills that are pretty uniquely human and are going to be, even more important.
I think there's an obsession of trying to predict viralization, right?
Mm,
Because if you go viral, you just reach like an absurd amount of people, and then all of a sudden your product, your brand just goes, you know, not goes mainstream, but you get to show up to a lot of people, and then that can generate sales, etc. And I believe that if we're all obsessed about like all the metrics and all the data and trying to go by the algorithm, where that's kind of like the opposite of viralization. It's just tapping on onto what you just said, right? That somebody had to take a risk because it realized that was it had a potential to be a very successful a track, right? Bohemian
mm.
Rhapsody. And then basically somebody just took a chance to just play it, and then it just went viral, and then it became one of the most iconic pop songs of ever. So I think it's a bit of a mix of risk as well, apart from intuition and taste.
Hmm.
And we have to be able to create space for that as well, right? To be able to risk and go
Hmm.
against all the data and algorithm decisions as well.
Yeah. I
But
mean, if I think about my favorite ads of all time, I would say not one of them would have checked the proverbial boxes of what right. There's so many of them. There's so many ways that we measure, and we do it a lot. I do it too. I work on like how do you make things sticky, how do you keep people engaged, like how do you structure a message to really communicate well to people, and there's an art and a science to that, and there's also an art to breaking away from that strategically, right? And my favorite ads, the ones that I can still go, oh yeah, I can almost like say them verbatim, are they don't apply to almost any of the rules, and that's one of the reasons that makes them really sticky, and one of the reasons that somebody with taste and conviction and intuition, right, was people there had to be people like that behind those things to make those things real, because they are the advertising Bohemian Rhapsodies in a way, right, that like don't fit the mold exactly, but in not fitting the mold kind of become more important and more memorable, and that's a really important thing to try to foster and to help grow, especially as creative people are surrounded with all these sort of like optimization oriented mindsets of what works, right, is to also be able to grow those seeds of things that are kind of not part of that sort of rule book, which can be hard because those things are also harder to sell.
true. True, true. So I think we're getting out of time, but just last thing, what are you most hopeful about the future of AI and how is impacting the creative industries?
Um, I I hope that people are able to be hopeful about it. I think that's part of it is just like having a really sort of positive attitude about the potential. As they say, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. We're in this new era of what technology is sort of enabling, and I think just being hopeful and having a positive attitude about how, as a creative person, having a positive attitude about how it can help me do things that I couldn't do before. I like to think of like if somebody said, "I'm not really interested in using AI," and how I feel like it's a sort of compromise, right? I feel it's a compromise to my craft to use AI. I would look at that and say, be, before you knock it, right? It's okay for people to, creatives and artists to be like, this is just not my bag. I'm not interested in utilizing AI. And there'll be some people that think that. I would challenge people first, have a really open mind. So that's that sort of positive mindset of like, okay, there's been a lot of technological evolutions in the past. There were some painters who really didn't like it when the camera was invented. You know what I mean? There's a lot of things that we stages we've gone through technologically as people that make art. I would say, um, dip your toe in, think about how AI can reduce the time you spend doing some things that maybe are not the most rewarding aspects of your work. Right, a lot of creative work. I think most people that work in a professional context in an agency or in a company, there's aspects of their job that is maybe not where they're firing on all cylinders, but they're doing something a little bit more tedious. I'd say if you're working in that kind of context, try utilizing AI to sort of limit that so that you can spend more time doing the types of things that are really engaging to you, that are really using your creativity the most. And I think if you're in a context where maybe you are, say, maybe it's like a more of a fine art context, right? You're a person who creates art and sells their art, right? Think about how AI, as you start to explore it, maybe can push your art into completely new places, right? I think that's one of the things that we saw historically happen in prior eras of technological evolution. When, like I mentioned, the camera is invented, and you have people who say, okay, well, if the camera can reproduce reality, right, so well, maybe some artists who replicated reality say, now I'm going to push myself to be more expressionistic or more abstract, and actually pushing and creating new art forms. So I think that's going to be what happens, creatives, as some of these things come in and say, okay, now computers can do this in the same way that the camera showed up and said, now cameras can do this. It's going to push people to try to do things that are not achievable through technology, and who knows all the different forms that could take. I wish I could predict every type of art form that's going to emerge as a result of this. But even without new art forms emerging, if you think about an artist maybe that works in 2 dimensions, right? Maybe your art can now be 3 dimensional. Maybe you're an artist that works in words, you're a poet, and now your poetry can be set to music. Maybe the things you make are static, and now they can be moving and they can be telling stories. And so that, I think that's a really sort of important way to look at it, is not as like this is diminishing my craft, but maybe just it's a new tool that helps you do your craft in new ways that you couldn't before. So hopefully that's kind of the positive take on it, and I think when people start experimenting with it, their eyes will light up at a certain point with what's possible.
Awesome. Cam, uh, thanks for a really interesting conversation. Where people can find you more about you and Kepler.
Keplergroup.com, keplergrp.com. Definitely encourage people to take a look at us. We're doing a lot of exciting things, making a lot of really interesting technology, and certainly doing some really fun things in creative. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn /Camm Rowland. And yeah, I would love to hear from people and connect. And I appreciate being on the show. Super exciting. Good way to start off a Monday morning. So it's great to have a chat. I appreciate it.
Likewise, it was really fun. Awesome. If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. It's free and helps us a lot. This way, it can help us also reach new listeners. Oh, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to stay up to date on our latest episodes. If you have any questions for us, reach out to us at hello@humanAIXP.com or connect with us on Instagram. Thanks for listening. See you next week.